Okay. Nope, that was not the slide. There we go. Okay, let me just deal with my own screens here. So, as usual, when I've got you all here and I'm sharing my screen, I can't see you all. So if you want to chime in, if there's a problem, you need to unmute and say something, and that'll help me fix the problem. If you're waving your hands at me or something, I won't be able to see it. All right, this chapter is on listening. I'll just say, I think there's some useful stuff in here. Some of this feels pretty elementary to me. So forgive me for assigning a chapter that if you felt it was a little elementary, I would share that. So let me pull out the handful of things that I think are important and we'll move on. So the useful thing here about the whole listening thing is what you want to do is move your audience to the stage where they are remembering. One of the things that some colleagues I know use, they use the phrase sticky, right? What is sticky? I think about this when I've seen a presentation or you watch a movie and then 3 days later, you're still thinking about it, right? There's something in that movie that's kind of gotten in your head. So that's what I mean by things are sticky. So how do you get so that the information you are trying to get across is perceived as sticky by others? Okay, so here I'm just going to give you the 5 stages, and then the next 5 slides is unpacking that. So the first stage is you receive the information, then you comprehend the information, you interpret it, make meaning out of it, you evaluate it, thinking about it, and then you respond. Okay, so don't worry about writing all these down. You're going to get this again in the next slides. So the first step here is receiving. So the thing to remember is audience members generally are going to hear what they think is important, not necessarily what you think is important. So it's really important right at the beginning to grab people's attention and get them to think about everything else you're going to say is going to be important. But hold on for complex, tricky stuff till later in the speech. So that's part of the reason why the intro, body, conclusion structure works so well with speeches is that you're not going to hit them with anything too complicated right off the bat. Second stage is comprehending. So you've gotten them listening, and now they're trying to understand what's going on. So always, always, always thinking about audience. So as they are going to be listening and understanding you, what are the metrics that they use? What is their worldview? How can you plug into that so that they are going to hear you? And then I just think it's always important to be thinking about personalizing, right? You should always be you as you're presenting. It's not like you're trying to present a fake persona or something. You want to be you on a good day. So think about that. When are you on a good day? When are you having a great time and doing a great presentation? That's the version of you that you want to bring. So, think about that. And so in terms of audience members connecting to this, right? When you personalize, when you include your stories, when you use your own voice, your own idioms, that's when you get connections. Okay. Not sure what happened there, but okay. And so part of that is, there is a level at which academia asks for kind of standard received English, for example. But I think the world is getting broader than that. And so on the one hand, you want to make sure that just your words are understood by a general audience, but it doesn't mean everybody has to sound like me in order to do that. So think about that. How do you use your own voice? How do you tell your own stories? If there's an illustration you're going to make, what is it from your background that you could use to illustrate that and connect the audience? So the next stage, the third stage, is interpreting. This is where the audience starts to assign meaning. They're listening and they're kind of grappling with this stuff, and now they're going, oh, I think this means that, right? So there's 3 communication codes that you're going to be using as you're doing a speech, and you want to get them all aligned. It's the visual and the vocal and the verbal. right? So that how you look, the tone you're using, and the words you're using should all be synchronized. Just remember that the verbal is just 30% of that, right? It's the least powerful of those communication codes. So you want to get them all kind of moving in the same direction. And the next stage is the audience. They've been interpreting, and then they kind of then that sort of the inner judge comes out like, wait a minute, right? Where somebody is maybe going to push back. They're assessing the evidence you're bringing forward, and they're either staying on board or they're getting ready to dismiss you. And of course, you want to stop them from dismissing you if you're going to try to persuade them. Everybody is going to be resistant to persuasion. Nobody comes into into any day going, well, I know I'm wrong, right? Everybody thinks they're right. And what you need to do is help convince them that they're wrong. So help moving the audience from where they are to where you want them to be. So there's a number of ways you can do this. First of all, just your own credibility as a speaker, right? That for people to buy into what you're saying, it really helps if they believe you as a person. And so if you look and sound confident, that really goes a long ways. In some cases, you're going to get an introduction that you'll get somebody who is going to be able to, set it up and introduce you. And so if you went and spoke at the Rotary Club, somebody would introduce you, for example. That kind of thing can really help your personal credibility. As you go from being somebody that the group doesn't know, you get introduced to the group, you start to be perceived as an insider, and then you are going to be more persuasive. So if you know that your audience trusts certain experts, then you can link your ideas to them. If you are speaking to a group of gun owners, if you're then citing Charlton Heston and Chuck Norris, that group of gun experts, gun owners, are going to be more likely to believe you because they know that Chuck Norris and Charlton Heston are both big Second Amendment supporters. So part of this is the audience analysis, right? Who is it that is trusted by your audience? And particularly, who is trusted by the people you're trying to move, right? You're going to have people who are already in your camp, or they're already kind of mostly on your side. But then it's just kind of a waste for you to be talking to them. That's what we call preaching to the choir, right? The choir's already in church. You got to go preach to the unwashed souls out on the street. So who is going to be trusted by the people who are most resistant, right? That's where you want to find your evidence that your audience is going to connect with. It helps if you've got connections to your audience's beliefs and you can demonstrate and show that. One of the ways to think about is, as you are tackling this problem that you are working through with your audience, it can be tempting to kind of assign blame. Well, it's this group's fault or it's that group's fault. But once again, if you're trying to move people, how do you move the people who are in that group that your tendency will be to blame them? So, if you're speaking for progressive taxation, for example, right, which we looked at in terms of our practice speeches, right, that the super wealthy should get taxed more than the not super wealthy. Well, if you can get the super wealthy on board, then you're much more likely to get your way, right? So think about how the problem is in common, try to avoid blame, and that's a way to connect with your audience. Finally, if they don't have to change a lot, just a little bit, then they're more likely to change for you. So a lot of this stuff is about persuasive speaking. And so it'll be more applicable on your third speech, but even on the second speech, right? If they have to just take on a couple of ideas, and they're not very tricky ideas, then they'll be better informed. So convince them that they don't have to change a whole lot, and they're more likely to hang with you and adopt the ideas that you're proposing. Okay, in the last phase of listening, the audience is responding. They're giving you feedback. So in public speaking circumstances, audience feedback it's usually nonverbal. So it's really one of more reason why you should be speaking extemporaneously. So you want to be watching the audience, getting the feedback and the cues from them, from their bodies. Once again, learning your audience, paying attention to your audience. There's different ways, there's different cultures of listening and providing feedback. You know, just the better you know your audience, the better you're going to be able to read and respond to them. Sometimes you'll have a single person who is responding poorly. It can be really hard. And I find as a teacher, I find that really hard. If I've got one student who's sleeping, right, or drifting off or just not there in the room, it's really, I tend to focus on that one student. And maybe I shouldn't be doing that so much, right? So if you find yourself really getting sucked into the one person who is not really interested in you, do your best to just ignore them and try to understand what other people are doing. So yeah, then you're going to want to adapt. If it feels like you're losing the audience, you're going to want to do something to change it up. I learned this when I was a young professional actor, and I went and did elementary school tours. And I was doing a two-person show about electricity, where electricity came from, how to use it carefully, and not waste it. The whole thing was paid for by the electric company monopolies. Anyway, I was going in and doing these like 40-minute presentations for groups of elementary school kids. And what I found is that if it felt like we were losing them, right? If they started to get shuffly and, you know, all that stuff, we had to amp up the energy. We had to get louder, we had to get bigger, and just throw energy at them, and we would pull their attention back. So if you're speaking to a crowd and it feels like they're not really with you, they're not really listening, or they're even exhibiting some behaviors that tell you that, amp it up, right? Give them energy, give them vocal energy, move more and all that stuff, and you can pull them back in. Okay, so then remembering. This is, of course, from Cats. Memories. Okay, so you know, you want audience, help them retain info. So here's some tips from the book about how to help them retain stuff. Story and emotion is really powerful for people remembering things. If part of what you do is tell a story, then that helps the audience to hook all the other data that you're providing. You can't just tell stories, but stories are very powerful. You see this all the time in political speaking, right? Well, they'll be talking about a particular political position, and then they'll tell you the story of, you know, Jane from such and such, you know, from Poughkeepsie, and this is what happened to her, and this is why we need to have this policy. So connecting those emotional stories in terms of getting people to just retain the ideas that you're trying to present. Personal experiences can be really powerful. I think we saw some of that with what Colin had to present in the last class, right? People's personal stories really do have a lot of power there. So thinking about how can you include that if it's the case for you. Visuals. As creatures, our visual memory is really much more powerful than other kinds of memory. And so if you can show us a picture, it's more likely we're going to retain it later. Surprisingly, the faster you talk, the better. I mean, there comes a point where it's unintelligible, but in fact, audience members can listen a lot more words per minute than most of us can speak. So when you know your stuff and you can rattle a lot of stuff off out there, actually that's a way to help them retain it. It also, because if you increase your speaking rate, sometimes you can repeat, right? Then there's time to say it again, and that repetition is really useful. Okay, looks like that's the end of that one. I'm going to stop that sharing, and I'm going to pull up. Any questions before I move on to the next little chunk of this lecture as we move on? Okay, so the next one is going to be about delivery and language. All right. Okay. Chapter 8, language style. How do you, what is some of the showmanship stuff of doing these presentations? So you've heard this before, but what are the speaking methods, right? Just going over this again, extemporaneous. This is what I'm pushing you guys to do, right? It's practice delivery. You don't have a lot of notes, and it's really helpful to have strong visual aids. Makes for extemporaneous speaking, right? As opposed to some of these other methods. Impromptu is, in impromptu speaking, it's like go, right? You don't have much time and you just have to go and do it. I think I gave you the example of a time when I was suddenly thrust into the position of being best man, and then at the reception was reminded with like a minute to spare that I was going to be expected to deliver the best man's speech, which I did. So a couple of tips about when that happens, right? Because it's going to happen. Suddenly your boss is going to say, hey, Bob, could you please, tell us about this product or something, and you weren't really expecting to do it, but here you go, okay? So decide your conclusion first. So, usually you'll have a minute or two, right, to maybe write some stuff down on a napkin. If nothing else, you just do it in your head, right? Where are you finishing? If you know where you're finishing, you can get off stage at the end. And we've seen this with a number of these first round of speeches, right, where you didn't carefully enough plan your button. You didn't carefully plan how you got done. And a lot of these speeches just kind of dribbled off at the end. Sort of a shrug and I guess I'm done, right? You always want your presentations to have that stronger close to them. So figure out how you're concluding. Make some quick notes if you can. Fake confidence. Sometimes, life is acting. And so it's worthwhile to just think about this, that, you're not as well prepared as you'd like to be. Fake confidence. It's much better than going, gosh, I didn't have any time and I'm really ill prepared. And this will probably be a total waste of your time, but here we go, right? You don't want to do that. So just like, oh yeah, of course I can do that, boss. Happy to do that. Fake confidence. You'll be surprised. Maybe you already know this, how far fake confidence can take you. Okay. Third kind of speaking method is manuscript, right? This is where you write it out and you read it at us. If you do this, and there are times when you're going to do this. President Kraft is always speaking, almost always speaking from a manuscript when he speaks. The president speaks from a manuscript, or the current president does. Former president didn't particularly use a manuscript hardly at all. But when you're sort of speaking for the government, boy, you got to get the words right. So, okay, so if you're going to type it out, use a large font so you can really read it easily with it at a distance from you. And then keep your script up high. It's part of the reason why it's useful to have a lectern, and you can put those notes out there and you can see the notes and you can be looking up and talking out with us, right, as you're reading and reading ahead. So as much as possible, if you're doing a manuscript speech, you're going to want to, do it many, many times so you're really comfortable with the words. And at some point, you're almost memorized. And you also, generally we want people to be speaking with us, right? And so even if you're doing a manuscript speech, maybe you're pretending to be speaking extemporaneously. Good actors can do this, right? When you're reading out loud, it can sound very natural. I do this some. I do some voiceover acting and commercial stuff and things like that. And I've got a script in front of me and I'm in a dialogue, and it's part of what an actor can do. If you're not a trained actor, it's harder to do it well. So generally you want to practice. So the last speaking method is memorizing it, right? You've written this thing out and you memorize it word for word. Boy, why work so hard, right? Most of the time people don't need it. We've got teleprompters now, so you could read, you could learn to do it. It's a lot of work. I do think it's useful sometimes to memorize small portions. Particularly, I would memorize my first couple of sentences and I would memorize my button, right? Know exactly what it is. It's just a sentence or, a couple of sentences overall that you are going to really have crafted exactly what are the words you're saying. Sometimes I see this where students will come up and they'll do a speech and they've got their nose down and they're reading the introduction and then they're doing the body of it extemporaneously and then they're reading their conclusion. It's just, you don't have that chance of, as I was talking about the previous little mini lecture here, right, about listening. You haven't really hooked the audience in if you're reading at them, right? It's much easier for them to tune you out. Oh, they're just reading at me. And then you've lost that opportunity for that first connection to help your audience listen. Okay, some things to think about in terms of language that you use. So thinking about your audience, always being yourself, but suit your language to your audience. If I'm speaking to a bunch of motorcycle riders, I probably will pepper my language with more expletives than if I'm speaking to the Sunday school, because that's the way the motorcycle riders that I know talk. So I'm connecting with the audience. I'm not going to fake it, right? It's not like if I didn't ever use expletives, I wouldn't suddenly start using them just because I'm talking to motorcycle riders. But I kind of got a potty mouth, and so I won't edit myself in that circumstance. So generally, you want to be picking concrete, forceful terms. You're going to find terms that are within your topic area that you're learning. Those are called terms of art, a term of art, which is that it's a term that in a particular context has a very specific, perhaps almost clinical meaning. So you're going to want to introduce those to us and use those throughout as well. So repetition and parallelism. I have a dream. I have a dream. I have a dream. It's part of the reason that that speech is so amazing and powerful from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., right? Is that he framed that his ideas with that same phrase repeatedly. So that parallel language throughout. What do you do about biased language? I think it's really hard as, you know, I'll tell you, as a 56-year-old straight white man in this society, I had to unlearn stuff, right? The culture that I grew up in and that was whispering in my ear was a racist, sexist, homophobic culture, and it still is. There's huge elements of that in all kinds of ways that show up in TV and movies and books and things like that. So it's part of the culture we are all in here, and it's the water we're swimming in, and so you don't even hardly notice it. And I'm sure you guys have been, working on this your whole lives, as it has been, just I think a real project in our society for the last 20, 30 years, to be thinking about bias and trying to be active about eliminating biased language. So good on you, right? Maybe you guys are going to be better at this than my generation was. Although by and large, we're working on it. So what do you do? And how do you approach this? So this is my thought for you, is to think about improving your radar, that you're going to notice, you're going to practice noticing, and you're going to care about noticing. And so that you're going to eliminate your own biased language. Is it going to happen sometimes? Probably, because the culture is biased. So things like, I'm watching The Man in the High Castle right now. It's a Netflix series, Amazon series. Anyway, it's some kind of a series, Man in the High Castle. I'd recommend it highly. It's a dystopian story, but the setup is sort of a what if America and the Allies had lost World War II. And the setup is that the West Coast is occupied by Japan and the East Coast is occupied by Germany. And there's a thin slice in the middle, basically the Mountain West, that's still America. But one of the things that's popping up in this is some biased language, and that characters are using the word Jap to describe Japanese people, which was pretty prevalent before and during World War II, and then has been pretty much eliminated from the lexicon since World War II. I would be shocked to hear somebody your generation use that epithet, but it pops up. But when I was a kid, it was there. I've read some of my grandfather's letters. It's there, and my grandfather was a Lutheran pastor, right? A super good guy. He was trying to be, he would never have intentionally done that. Anyway, so there's all kinds of words like that. You gyp somebody. You're gonna con them out of their money. You're gonna gyp them. That's from gypsy. You shouldn't use people's, culture and ethnic background in a negative way like that. So when do you learn? On what day do you learn that gyp is probably as bad as some other language like that? Well, maybe today's the day you learn that. So everybody has to learn everything. You're going to have to learn things, and you're going to have to unlearn things. So give yourself grace if you mess up, or if somebody corrects you, take a deep breath, accept that, try to learn from it, because you're going to try to eliminate biased language. I spent way too long on this point. I'm moving on. Um, Oftentimes, people will frame ideas with "I think" or "I feel," and particularly the sociological data is that women tend to do this more than men. That men are better at just speaking directly and forcefully, and women culturally have a tendency to put these qualifiers in. It's not that, the sky is blue. I think the sky is blue. It's not that we should change this policy. I think we should change this policy. When you add "I think" and "I feel," it kind of it makes it about you and not about the thing, right? So if you find you're doing that, work on getting rid of it. And then in terms of, sometimes there are some topics that people get uncomfortable with because it's about, I don't know, bodies or sex or things like that. In general, avoid euphemisms. Just use the clinical language. If you're talking about sex, name the genitalia appropriately. If you're talking about, taxes, use the words, right? Avoid euphemisms. Oh, there's a bunch of these things that are in this chapter, and they kind of, oh, I'm going to explain what alliteration is and what personification is. That's lovely. I'm not going to ask you about it. I think it's just not the kind of thing where you're going to practice that. I'm not going to say, oh, you must use 3 instances of onomatopoeia and avoid hyperbole. No. It's useful stuff. It's going to make you a better writer. It's going to make you a better speaker if you know what these things are. So if you don't know, go back to your book and take another look through this and think about what those examples are. But I'm not going to ask you to do it. I'm not going to ask you to define it. Okay, some things about nonverbals. So not the words you're using, but how your body is up there. So oftentimes the question is, how should you dress? And the standard is dress 1 step above the average in the audience. So for example, in class, most of the time students are coming in, they're wearing sweats or jeans, printed t-shirts, things like that. You'll notice for class, I'm always dressed 1 step above that, right? I generally have a button-down shirt on. I'll wear a pair of slacks without holes in them, that kind of thing. But I'm not coming in wearing a 3-piece suit, right? Because you, my audience, isn't, if you were all there in, shirts and ties, then I would need to have a suit coat on, right? So that's the general standard. Is think about what the general standard is for collegiate life, and then dress a little bit nicer than that. Don't show up in your, sweats and t-shirts. Show that you care. Facial expressions. So, I don't think you can really control this. And you'd have to be a really good actor in order to fake it really well. So you need to be authentic and then share it. This is particularly a problem for men in our culture. That men are really taught to hide their emotions, and in particular in academic situations to not really care because it's cool to not care, and that's bull. So you should care. You're picking topics that you care about. You've picked these topics that you care about. Okay, share your enthusiasm for it. So that's how you're going to get facial expressions that draw the audience in and get them to connect. Eye contact. So the book talks about this 3 to 5 seconds thing. Boy, I don't do that. I don't know anybody who does. The way to think about eye contact, I suggest, is to spread the focus around the room. That you're not going to want to just pick one person. For God's sake, don't just pick me. That you're going to want to look around at different people, and you're going to look at them for a second or two and then move on. But boy, if you're looking at somebody for 5 seconds, that feels like a long time, I think. Maybe this is a cultural thing for me or us up here in the Midwest. But anyway, spread your focus around. Okay, so things about posture and movement and gestures and how do you move? How do you stand? What are you supposed to do? Okay, so first of all, stand up straight and tall. The brilliant 20th century actor John Gielgud once was asked what his advice was to be a good actor. He said, stand up straight and tall, say your lines loud and clear, and don't fall off the stage, which is great advice for anyone. But the first one is that, right? Stand up straight and tall. Stand the way your mother has wanted you to stand your whole life. And that just makes a huge difference in terms of how you're going to be received by the audience. What is your posture like? It's you on a good day when you're feeling good about yourself, you stand up straight and tall. When you got something to offer, you stand up straight and tall. Same kind of thing with gestures as I have for facial expressions. You need to find your own gestures that are natural. If you sort of plan out your gestures and you decide what you're going to do when, right, it's going to end up feeling awkward, right? So don't sweat it. It's way too much work. All of you gesture naturally when you're talking. You all gesture when you're talking with friends. So put yourself in that headspace of I'm presenting this thing and I'm going to have an active body. That's how you make gestures that are real. And when you make a gesture, if you can hold it and extend it, it becomes more powerful. It's a little tricky here on the camera with you. And in fact, I've got my camera off on myself, so I'm not even checking myself here, right? But on the stage, what you're going to want to do is if you find yourself going, pointing a finger, right? You can just point that finger and drop the arm, but it's better to point the finger and hold it and talk a little while with that gesture still happening. So when you find yourself, and when you practice, you should practice actually doing gestures. Notice when you do a gesture, right? And then go, oh, I just did a big gesture. That's good, right? Because the default is to not gesture. The default is to stand with your hands at your sides or your hands in your pockets and you're just talking and there's nothing moving but your mouth, right? That you're sort of this deer in the headlights and I'm talking and then there's nothing happening, right? So as you gesture, include it, notice it, extend and raise them. Okay, some things about delivery and how you speak. Share your enthusiasm. That's the best advice I can give you in terms of making dynamic vocal delivery is when you're authentically enthusiastic, that stuff comes out. So you don't need to edit it, right? So what comes out, volume, how loud or how soft, what's your pitch and how much do you pitch and how fast do you speak, how well are you articulating? If you really care, you are articulate because you don't want to have to repeat yourself. Think about your mother or father when they're angry with you, right? Do I have to repeat myself, right? You're in trouble when they really start to articulate. If you've got some verbal tics or mispronunciations, you're going to need to clean them up, right? In terms of being an effective public speaker. There was an actress I worked with early on, and my directing teacher came and watched a rehearsal, and he was talking to me afterward, and he said, "Why haven't you done something about her?" I said, "What?" He said, "She goes every time she speaks, every line. There was that tisk sound that she would do, and I didn't even hear it because it's such a Midwestern thing, but she did that. Every line started with a." And what it is when you're in a noisy situation, that's one of the highest pitch noises you can make, that kind of a thing, and it'll cut through, and it sort of serves in some ways as a signal to the other people in the group or the other person you're talking with that you want to speak. You've taken a breath and you make that noise. And so she was just doing this all the time, every line. So that was a verbal tic. We started working on it. Eliminate vocal pauses. So a vocal pause is where you go, that you're not just pausing, but you're filling the pause with noise, with vocalizations. I had a professor of theater history who, when he lectured, he would talk at about this rate, and it was maddening, right? So work on eliminating those vocal pauses. I know I do them. I do so. Sometimes people in your generation will use like too much, those kinds of things. Start listening for them and eliminate them. One of the ways you're going to hear them is by recording yourself and listening to yourself. And then there's going to be stuff you do that you hate. And that's how you become aware of it is, you have to start by becoming aware, and only then can you become conscious and work on it. Okay, this is one of my biggest bits of advice for you that you're probably not going to hear anywhere else. How do you know you're loud enough? This works in any environment. where you are speaking with your own natural speaking voice and trying to fill a room. You can actually, if you're paying attention to it, you can hear your own voice coming back off the walls in the room. And so that's how you know you're loud enough. So I've got a big voice. I could speak in Memorial Auditorium and I would know I'm being heard when I'm speaking if I can hear my own voice coming off the back wall. That's how loud, you have to be really loud to be heard in there, but I would know that, right? But if I'm speaking in a classroom, it's much smaller. I don't have to speak that loud, but I always know how loud I am in whatever theater I'm working in because you can hear your own voice coming back. Okay, some things that will help in terms of your delivery are what we call immediacy behaviors. So if you think about it, it's like immediate is now, but it's also here. So think of it as being here now. And there are behaviors you can do that, things you can do that the audience will think, oh, they are really here with me now. They are part of my team. And those kinds of things will help you connect with your audience and help them listen. So humor is great, but you got to be careful, right? Because all humor is based in pain, which means it's based in somebody's pain. And so just got to be really careful with that. Remember that when you're speaking to what you think is a hostile audience, that you probably don't want to use humor. If you're speaking to a friendly audience, go right ahead. You'll get the big laughs and they'll connect. But that's preaching to the choir, right? When you're speaking to a friendly audience. For all of you, as you're heading into your persuasive speeches, your third speeches, but even in these second speeches, right, you're dealing with contentious issues. You should assume that some portion of your audience is going to be hostile to your ideas. Those are the people you want to connect with. Those are the people you want to win over. So don't make jokes at their expense. Your own personal stories is an immediacy behavior, right? Is that it's not just about far off people, it's about me as a real person. You sometimes hear this with politicians where they're talking about their own real lives, they're talking about their families and things like that, stories of their families. If you can connect with the group, if you can say we and us, if you use people's names, whoever introduces you, thanks Bob for that great introduction, right? Suddenly you're calling Bob Bob and they all call Bob Bob. So I must be on the inside because I'm also on a first name basis with Bob, right? So those kinds of things can really help you to connect with the group. Eye contact is an immediacy behavior, right? If you're actually looking. So as a speaker, if you are one of these people who wants to talk up and above the audience, you're not going to be connecting. You're not going to have that immediacy behavior, and they're not going to recognize that you're on the in group, right? So make eye contact. Conversational tone, right? Just sort of, that's part of the reason why we speak extemporaneously, is to be having a conversation. It then lowers the barriers, makes us feel less like we're being talked at or lectured at and just being talked with. And so you're going to have to find ways to take the complicated ideas that you need to present and make them just something you can just talk about in a conversational way. I've just been joined by my cat. I know you all want to see the cat, so I'm going to start my video so I can show you the cat here as a brief break. There he is, Frito. Rescue. Okay, stop that video, David. Back to where we were. All right. Immediate behavior includes enthusiasm, right? Where you are, if you're excited and you're sharing that, then people feel like, oh, okay, we're all part of this, right? All in this together. Eye contact twice. I guess I must have thought it was really important. And then a relaxed body, right? Just sort of being chill, being yourself. Then the audience thinks that we're connected, right? So if you're not relaxed, try to find a way to do that, right? Take the deep breaths, do what you can to relax, and then beyond that, fake that you're relaxed, comfortable up there, okay? Okay, rehearsal tips. Is everything still working right here? I assume so. Something's in the chat. Cute. Yes, thank you. He is cute. He's a good boy. Still figuring out how to, we got him just before, just after Christmas. So still figuring this place out. Okay, rehearsal tips. So you're going to start with lots of notes, right? You're going to start with too many notes. And what I've tried to impress upon you is take and reduce those notes so that eventually you have very few or no notes. And, you know, you need to have complicated information you're getting across to us. Part of it is that you need to get familiar with that and internalize it enough, and then you don't need as many notes. You're going to start by practicing alone, but eventually get some friends to listen to you. Ask your roommate to take a half an hour and listen to you do your speech and give you some feedback. Connect with somebody else in this class and come into the classroom and set everything up and do your speeches for each other. Go to the Oral Communication Center. If you didn't already do this on the first speech, you need to do that on this speech or you're going to lose overall grade points. So once you've practiced a little bit, set up an appointment with the Oral Communication Center. The link is on our Moodle site, and then go in and do your speech for them. Get coaching. Don't just assume you're going to be brilliant at this. Assume that you're not going to be brilliant at this and you have to work on it. Practice with your visual aids. If you've got props, you can practice with them. Rarely do I see physical props anymore, but out in the real world, you might at some point. Get rest. Get rest. In general, make sure you're taking care of yourself and getting rest. But it'll make you a better speaker on the day if you've rested the night before. Have a low-tech backup plan, right? Because sometimes the PowerPoint fails and you still have to do that presentation because your boss expects you to show up and do the presentation. If you can show that you are resilient and nimble and adaptable, that's going to be to your credit. So don't let it throw you too much when things go wrong. It can actually be an opportunity for you to make yourself shine. Excuse me. I think that's the end. Yes, that's the end. All righty, I'm going to stop that share. I'm going to go back to see myself. Okay. So we've got, it's 12:40. Are there any questions about anything I just went over, either sort of in general, any specific questions you might have about things? Yes, Ashley.
When you're delivering a speech, and should you move around or should you just stay where you're delivering your speech from?
That's a great question. So the kind of movement you're talking about is what they call platform movement, right? So it's not sort of a gestural movement, it's moving on the platform. It really it depends. We've got so much stuff that's camera now, right? So it's like speaking for the camera. Even if you're speaking in class to the classroom, that movement is a little trickier with the camera, although I'm more interested in the classroom of you performing for the classroom and less for the camera. The other tricky thing about our classroom is that because the projector screen is right in the middle and it shines, if you try to move from one side of the screen to the other, you have to walk through that beam and it can kind of be awkward. So some of that platform movement can be awkward in our classroom. In general, platform movement is good and it can help to distinguish main points from each other. Be a little careful. If any of you did high school speech or have seen high school speech, you may have seen this, right? Where the person does the introduction and then they step to one side for the first point and they step to the other side for the second point and they're back to the middle for the third point. And if you watch 10 speeches and they all do this, it's suddenly you're like, oh, this is fake. You're not really authentically, I got to go here to talk about this idea. And gosh, this is a new idea. So I'm going to, it just reads as fake, right? So you have to be a little careful about it. I think it's helpful and be careful about it. See, terrible non-answer, Ashley. That's what I'm best at.
No, it's okay.
Did I?
Something.
It's all good. Did I just say, I think that's the, oh, I see. Very funny, Andrew. I was answering questions. Are there any other questions about the lecture materials? And Ashley's question was spot on. Okay. So I think what we're going to do now is, since we don't have a whole lot of time, let's just call it for today. And class on Wednesday will be me yammering at you about the persuasion chapter. Okay. All right. So continue working on your next speeches. Please feel free to email me if you've got questions or ideas, like as you're reviewing the kind of work you did on the first one, and you're trying to think about how do you make the next one better. Please reach out to me, right? I'm not going to do sort of mandated individual appointments for this next one like we did the last, but I think it's to your benefit if you actually do that, right? Reach out to me, say, I think this is where I'm heading, right? Just even topic conversations, I can respond to those very quickly, and then you know you're on track, okay? All right, I truly am done now. Have a great day. I will stick on here if anybody has individual questions. Otherwise, I'll see you, and we'll just do Zoom on Wednesday.